August 13th, 1937. Chinese forces attack Japanese ships moored in Shanghai. Within days, the largest city in China becomes a battleground. 1 million troops, more soldiers than fought at Gettysburg, Waterloo, and Verdun combined, clash in brutal urban warfare. Tanks rumble through city streets. Poison gas chokes residential neighborhoods. Air raids flatten entire blocks. And the entire world is watching. Because Shanghai isn't just any city, it's an international settlement jointly run by 14 countries, including Japan. 30,000 foreign civilians live here, shielded in the international settlement while Chinese and Japanese soldiers butcher each other mere blocks away. Foreign journalists photograph the carnage. Diplomats send frantic cables. Newsreels carry the horror to audiences in London, Paris, New York. For 3 months, Shanghai burns. The Chinese National Revolutionary Army suffers catastrophic losses, particularly its elite German-trained divisions that took years to build. But one battalion, the Suicide Battalion, holds the Sihong warehouse for 6 desperate days, buying time for others to escape. Their sacrifice becomes legend. The world watches Chinese soldiers fight to the death rather than surrender. Then comes the pursuit to Nanking. What happens next will shock even hardened observers. 6 weeks of systematic atrocities. Between 50,000 and 300,000 civilians murdered. 30,000 prisoners of war executed in mass killings. Bodies piled in streets. Burned. Dumped in the Yangtze River. The rape of Nanking appalls the world, but words of condemnation aren't backed by action. And this is just the beginning. Because the Battle of Shanghai, often forgotten in Western histories of World War II, marks the moment when regional conflict becomes global catastrophe. Some historians argue World War II didn't begin in 1939 with Germany's invasion of Poland. It began in 1937 in Shanghai, when China and Japan plunged into an 8-year war that would kill 15 to 20 million Chinese, more than all American, British, and French casualties in World War II combined. This is the story of China's War of Resistance. A war where the Chinese government flooded the Yellow River, drowning 500,000 of its own civilians to slow the Japanese advance. A war where American volunteers called the Flying Tigers fought Japanese Zeros over Chinese skies. A war where Vinegar, Joe Stilwell, and Chiang Kai-shek's mutual loathing nearly destroyed the Allied cause in Asia. A war that ended with atomic bombs and Soviet invasion, only to immediately become a civil war that killed millions more. To understand how the Battle of Shanghai began World War II, we need to go back to when tensions finally exploded. China, 1937. Tensions have been rising on the border with Manchukuo, a puppet state run by an increasingly militaristic Japan. So far, China's nationalist leader, Chiang Kai-shek, has carefully avoided a major confrontation. His strategy: buy time to eliminate his internal communist enemies first. But bowing to increasing anti-Japanese sentiment across China, he's concluded a truce with the communists. On July 7th, at the Marco Polo Bridge outside Beiping, modern Beijing, there's an argument over a missing Japanese soldier. Shots are fired. Within days, Japanese reinforcements flood the area. But this time, China is ready to push back. In a speech made 10 days after the Marco Polo Bridge incident, Chiang Kai-shek warns of the struggle ahead. Let our people fully understand the meaning of the limit of endurance and the scale of sacrifice implied. For once that stage is reached, we can only sacrifice and fight to the bitter end. The national mood is summed up by a popular song, March of the Volunteers. Arise, those who refuse to be slaves, with our flesh and blood. Let us build our new Great Wall. In 1978, March of the Volunteers will become China's official national anthem, a reminder of this moment when the nation chose resistance over submission. The fighting around Beiping rapidly escalates into a full-scale invasion. Some historians consider this, not September 1939, the moment World War II begins. Chiang Kai-shek's National Revolutionary Army, NRA, is in the unusual position of receiving support from both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. But it's not enough to hold back the Japanese Imperial Army. With superior tactics, modern equipment, and air superiority, they smash through Chinese defenses. Within 6 weeks, nearly 200,000 Japanese troops have occupied a broad swathe of northern China, including the old imperial capital Beiping. The situation is desperate. The Chinese army is taking heavy casualties. Morale is cracking. Chiang Kai-shek needs to do something dramatic, something that will divert Japanese forces from their northern offensive, demonstrate Chinese resistance to the world, rally his own people. He decides to strike where it will hurt most and gain maximum international attention: Shanghai, China's largest city. Its commercial and cultural capital, home to 30,000 foreign civilians from 14 nations. What happens next will be one of the largest and bloodiest urban battles in history, and the entire world will watch it unfold in real time. Shanghai is the largest city in China and its commercial and cultural capital. The heart of the city is the international settlement, established by Western imperial powers in the 19th century and jointly run by 14 countries, including Japan. It's a city within a city: foreign laws, foreign police, foreign courts. A place where British bankers, American traders, French diplomats, and Japanese merchants all conduct business in uneasy coexistence. The Japanese have recently overtaken the British as the largest foreign presence in Shanghai. 30,000 Japanese civilians live in the city, protected by 8,000 Japanese Marines and 32 naval vessels moored along the waterfront. This creates a unique strategic situation. Shanghai contains both Chinese and Japanese military forces, with tens of thousands of foreign civilians caught in between. For Chiang Kai-shek, Shanghai offers an irresistible opportunity. First, attack Japanese forces here, and you attack them where they're vulnerable, in an urban environment surrounded by Chinese civilians who can support resistance. Second, fight in Shanghai, and the entire world watches. Foreign journalists, diplomats, and civilians are right there, observing every battle, photographing every atrocity. Third, Shanghai's symbolic importance is enormous. Losing China's greatest city would be a catastrophic blow to Japanese prestige. On August 13, 1937, Chiang Kai-shek orders Chinese forces to attack Japanese ships moored in Shanghai. The Japanese send reinforcements immediately. Within days, Shanghai and the surrounding region become a major battlefront, drawing in forces that will eventually total 1 million troops. 1 million soldiers fighting in and around a city packed with civilians. The scale is staggering. More troops than fought at Gettysburg, 165,000. More than Waterloo, 200,000. More than Verdun at its peak, 700,000. The city is devastated in fierce urban fighting. Tanks rumble through streets designed for rickshaws. Artillery shells flatten apartment buildings. Air raids turn entire neighborhoods into rubble. The Chinese use poison gas against Japanese positions. The Japanese respond with their own chemical weapons. And through it all, Foreign civilians in the international settlement watch from their windows, photograph the carnage, send frantic reports to their governments. The Battle of Shanghai has begun. It will last 3 months. And what happens here will change the course of World War II. The NRA throws its best forces into Shanghai, the elite German-trained divisions. Since the early 1930s, German military advisors have been helping modernize the Chinese army. They've trained 80,000 troops in modern infantry tactics, established military academies, and reorganized units along German lines. These divisions represent years of investment, China's most professional, best-equipped forces. And Chiang Kai-shek is about to spend them like water. The fighting in Shanghai is brutal beyond description. Urban warfare in one of the world's most densely populated cities. Every building becomes a fortress. Every street becomes a killing zone. Chinese soldiers fight from rooftops, from sewers, from ruins of buildings that were standing yesterday. Japanese forces advance with tanks, artillery support, and air cover. They methodically flatten resistance, block by block. But the Chinese keep fighting. The NRA suffers heavy losses, particularly to those precious German-trained divisions. Entire battalions are wiped out in single engagements. Regiments that took years to train are destroyed in weeks. By late October, after 3 months of continuous battle, the Chinese position becomes untenable. Japanese reinforcements keep arriving by sea. Chinese supply lines are stretched to breaking. Casualties are unsustainable. Chiang Kai-shek orders a withdrawal. But he leaves behind one battalion with a mission that seems like suicide. Hold the Sihong Warehouse, a massive 6-story concrete building on the north bank of Suzhou Creek, right on the edge of the international settlement. Hold it for as long as possible. Buy time for the main army to escape. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Xie Jinyuan, knows exactly what this order means. His men, around 400 soldiers, are being asked to die so others can live. They accept the mission anyway. And what happens next will make them legends. The Sihong Warehouse sits on the border between the Chinese-held area and the international settlement. Foreign observers can literally see the battle from their windows across Suzhou Creek. Lieutenant Colonel Xie Jinyuan and his 400 soldiers, though he tells the Japanese he has 800, giving them the nickname 800 Heroes, prepare for a siege. They fortify the warehouse, stockpile ammunition, prepare firing positions on every floor, and they wait. The Japanese assault begins on October 27th, 1937. Wave after wave of infantry attacks. Artillery bombardment. Airstrikes. The warehouse is massive concrete construction, difficult to destroy. But the defenders are vastly outnumbered. For 6 days, the suicide battalion holds out. Chinese soldiers repel Japanese assaults from multiple floors. When ammunition runs low, they throw grenades. When grenades run out, they drop concrete blocks on attackers. At night, they make raids to gather supplies from abandoned buildings nearby. And the entire time, foreign civilians and journalists watch from the international settlement across the creek. They photograph Chinese soldiers fighting to the death. They document Japanese atrocities against prisoners. They send cables around the world describing the desperate resistance. One night, a young Chinese girl named Yang Huimin swims across Suzhou Creek carrying a Chinese flag. Under fire, defenders raise the flag on the warehouse roof, visible to everyone in the international settlement. It becomes an iconic image, the Chinese flag flying defiantly over Shanghai's ruins while the city burns. On November 1st, after 6 days of fighting, British authorities negotiate a ceasefire. The surviving defenders, about 370 men, withdraw across Suzhou Creek into the international settlement, where they're interned for the duration of the war. Lieutenant Colonel Ji Jinwan refused to leave China. He remains with his men in internment. In 1941, he's assassinated by collaborators who've joined the Japanese puppet government. But the 800 heroes become legendary, symbols of Chinese resistance, proof that Chinese soldiers could stand against Japanese aggression. Their sacrifice bought 6 precious days for the main NRA forces to withdraw in better order. But more importantly, their fight occurred directly under the gaze of foreign observers. Images and reports from Shanghai travel around the world, turning Western public opinion firmly against Japan. The world has watched Shanghai burn. Now it's about to witness something even worse. Japanese forces pursue the retreating NRA westward to Nanking, the new nationalist capital. After 3 months of brutal fighting in Shanghai, Japanese soldiers are exhausted, angry, and hungry for vengeance. Their commanders have promised them that Nanking will be different, that the city is theirs to do with as they please. The NRA attempts to defend Nanking but is overwhelmed after a ferocious 4-day battle. Japanese forces enter the city on December 13th, 1937. The few Westerners inside the city, about 24 foreigners, form an international safety zone to shelter themselves and some of the local population. They manage to protect perhaps 250,000 civilians within this zone. But most Chinese civilians, hundreds of thousands more, are left outside, at the mercy of the Japanese army. What happens next will shock the world. For 6 weeks, Japanese soldiers go on a rampage, looting every building is systematically stripped. Valuables, food, clothing, everything is taken. Torture civilians are subjected to horrific abuses. Competitive killing becomes entertainment for soldiers. Rape women and girls from ages 8 to 80 are systematically raped, often multiple times, often murdered afterward. Estimates range from 20,000 to 80,000 victims. Murder. Between 50,000 and 300,000 civilians are killed. Around 30,000 Chinese prisoners of war are shot in mass executions, lined up along the Yangtze River and machine-gunned. Their bodies dumped into the water. Others are decapitated or buried alive or used for bayonet practice. Bodies pile up in the streets, burned and dumped in the Yangtze River until the water runs red. The international safety zone is managed by John Rabe, a German businessman and Nazi Party member. Rabe is appalled by the violence he witnesses. He documents everything in detailed diaries, photographs the atrocities, sends desperate cables to Berlin begging Hitler to intervene with Germany's Japanese allies. But Hitler doesn't intervene. Instead, the fall of Nanking convinces the Nazis that Japan is the stronger partner in Asia. Germany cuts off its military support to China, abandoning Chiang Kai-shek just when he needs help most. The rape of Nanking appalls the world. It's condemned by the United States and the League of Nations, the international body dedicated to maintaining world peace. But their words are not backed up by action. No sanctions. No military intervention. Just condemnation and outrage. The lesson Japan learns: the world will protest, but it won't act. Atrocities become a feature of the Japanese war against China. By June 1938, the Japanese army is driving westward toward Wuhan, a strategically vital city in central China. There's a rare Chinese victory at the Battle of Taiyuan, but it's not enough to halt the Japanese advance. Chiang Kai-shek's government makes a desperate and fateful decision: breach the dikes holding back the Yellow River at Huayuankou. The hope: the floods will stop the Japanese army in its tracks, drowning soldiers, destroying equipment, making the entire region impassable. In early June, the floodwaters of the Yellow River surge south and east across the densely populated North China Plain. There has been no advanced warning to the villages and towns in its path. The consequences are catastrophic: farmland submerged, entire villages swept away, people drowning in their homes, in their fields, on roads where they tried to flee. 500,000 civilians perish in the initial flooding. 5 million are made homeless. The loss of farmland will cause famine and hardship for years to come, potentially millions more deaths from starvation and disease. This is one of the greatest man-made disasters in history, committed by the Chinese government against its own people. Let that sink in. To slow the Japanese advance, Chiang Kai-shek deliberately flooded the Yellow River, knowing it would kill hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians. The moral calculation was brutal: sacrifice 500,000 now to potentially save millions later by stopping the Japanese. But the floods failed to stop the Japanese. They merely bypassed the affected areas, shifting their axis of advance slightly south. By the time Chinese and Japanese forces clash near Wuhan, there are nearly 2 million men engaged, making it one of the largest battles of the war. The battle for the city is hard-fought, with heavy losses on both sides. But once again, Japanese air power, superior tactics, and the widespread use of poison gas proved decisive. The city falls after 4 months of fighting. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government retreats 500 miles further inland to Chongqing in the western province of Sichuan. The Japanese now occupy China's largest cities and install a new puppet government in Nanking. But despite its victories, the Japanese army is too exhausted to land another major blow. The war enters a stalemate that will last for years. Historians label this conflict the Second Sino-Japanese War. The Chinese call it the War of Resistance, but it's about to become a crucial front in a world war. By 1939, China's only major foreign backer is the Soviet Union. It provides crucial supplies, and its pilots and aircraft make up most of the nationalist air force. The Soviets are fighting their own war against Japan, a widely forgotten conflict on Russia's far eastern frontier. But that summer, with war looming in Europe, Stalin makes a truce with Japan. It's signed on September 15th, 1939. 2 days later, Soviet troops invade Poland as allies of Nazi Germany. China has lost its major foreign ally. Despite this, China fights on against the Japanese occupation. Chongqing becomes a nationalist redoubt, pummeled by more than 200 Japanese air raids. In northern China, communists carry out large-scale guerrilla attacks on the Japanese. But all cooperation between communists and nationalists has once more been broken off. Each side preparing for the civil war they know will follow Japan's eventual defeat. The nationalists now receive foreign arms and supplies via French Indochina, today's Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. So in 1940, Japan occupies French Indochina to cut this supply link. But this fresh act of Japanese imperialism alarms the Western powers, whose Southeast Asian colonies are now within range of Japanese forces. The United States, Britain, and the Netherlands impose an oil embargo on Japan, which threatens to cripple its economy and its war effort in China. The Western powers hope Japan will back down. But in Tokyo, the decision is taken to gamble on war. In December 1941, the Japanese launch a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. They simultaneously bomb U.S. and British bases across Southeast Asia in a series of rapid, bold advances. The Japanese capture British Hong Kong and Singapore, the Philippines, the oil-rich Dutch East Indies. But Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor has woken a sleeping giant. Within a year, U.S. factories are turning out more vehicles, ships, and aircraft than all the other combatant powers put together. China will be one beneficiary. After Pearl Harbor, China becomes one of the four major Allied powers, alongside the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. American aid begins flowing. More than $1.5 billion worth of armaments as part of the U.S. Lend-Lease program. But getting supplies to China is a nightmare. When the Japanese take Burma, supplies have to be flown into China from India, a perilous route over the Himalayas, known to U.S. pilots as the Hump. Hundreds of aircraft are lost flying this route. Thousands of tons of supplies fall into mountain valleys. But the aid keeps coming. Chiang Kai-shek also receives a new chief military advisor, the famously acerbic U.S. General Joseph Vinegar Joe Stilwell. Stilwell regards Chiang as a stubborn, ignorant, prejudiced, and conceited despot. The loathing is mutual. Chiang, like many, finds Stilwell's arrogant and overbearing manner hard to stomach. Their relationship will poison Allied cooperation in China for years. Further aid comes in the form of Major General Claire Chennault's famous Flying Tigers. This elite squadron of American volunteers, officially the first American volunteer group, has remarkable success against the Japanese Air Force flying P-40 Warhawk fighters. They develop tactics specifically designed to counter the more maneuverable Japanese Zero-Never dogfight. Use speed and diving attacks. Hit and run. Between December 1941 and July 1942, the Flying Tigers claim 297 Japanese aircraft destroyed while losing only 14 pilots. It's a kill ratio of more than 20-1, unprecedented in aerial warfare. As the war goes on, more U.S. air units arrive in China, leading to the construction of several U.S. air bases across the country. In November 1943, Chiang travels to Cairo, Egypt, to attend a conference with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt. Chinese resistance is tying down nearly 1 million Japanese soldiers, troops that could otherwise be fighting Americans in the Pacific or British in Burma. Churchill and Roosevelt assure Chiang of increased support, though in reality, neither sees China as a priority. The real war, the war that matters to London and Washington, is happening in Europe and the Pacific. China is a secondary theater. Yet help is desperately needed. What remains of the Chinese economy is collapsing with rampant inflation, corruption, and a devastated industrial sector. The nationalist government is struggling to pay its soldiers, who desert in growing numbers. Just as Japan is preparing to launch its largest operation of the war, April 1944, Japan is on the back foot against the Allies in the Pacific. American forces are island-hopping toward Japan. The Imperial Navy has been crippled at Midway. The situation is desperate. Japan hopes to salvage things with a massive offensive in China. Operation Ichigo, Operation Number 1. The goals: link northern China with Indochina by land. Destroy U.S. airfields in southern China that are being used to bomb Japan. Knock China out of the war entirely. The operation involves 500,000 Japanese troops and 100,000 puppet Chinese forces, making it the largest Japanese military operation of World War II. weakened Chinese forces break under the onslaught. Several U.S. air bases are taken. The connection between North and South is established by October. Once more, the Chinese military suffers enormous losses. Entire armies disintegrate. Equipment is abandoned. Morale collapses. Defeat is another blow to Chiang Kai-shek's reputation. His government has been losing battles, failing to pay soldiers, allowing rampant corruption, hoarding U.S. aid for the coming civil war with communists. When Stilwell demands that he be put in direct command of all Chinese forces, Chiang gets him replaced. But U.S. faith in Chiang is fraying. Some American observers contrast nationalist corruption and incompetence with the success of the Chinese communists, who continue to wage effective guerrilla warfare against the Japanese in the north. The communists are disciplined, motivated, and growing stronger while the nationalists weaken. But the success of Operation Ichigo comes too late to save Japan. In spring 1945, the last major Japanese offensive in China is defeated, and Chinese troops counterattack. U.S. strategic bombing of Japan's home islands escalates. And then comes the end. August 6, 1945, the United States drops an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Approximately 70,000 people die instantly. Another 70,000 will die from radiation effects over the following months. August 9th, a second atomic bomb strikes Nagasaki. Approximately 40,000 people die instantly. Another 40,000 will die later from radiation. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union, which has maintained neutrality with Japan throughout the war, suddenly declares war and invades Manchuria. 1.5 million Soviet troops pour across the border with 5,000 tanks and 5,000 aircraft. The Japanese Kwantung Army, once the empire's most powerful force, has been stripped of its best units to defend the home islands. It collapses within days. Within a week of the Hiroshima bombing, Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's unconditional surrender to the Allies. World War II is over. For China, the cost has been staggering. Between 15 and 20 million Chinese lives are lost. Only the Soviet Union suffers more casualties. Then there are the multitudes of wounded, the refugees, the destitute. Cities lie in ruins. The economy has collapsed. Infrastructure has been destroyed. The country will have to undergo complete reconstruction, but who will lead it is still to be settled. Because Japan's defeat leaves a power vacuum in China, and both nationalists and communists rush to fill it. From the Soviet Union, the communists receive control of Manchuria and capture Japanese weaponry. The U.S. and Britain fly nationalist forces into northern and eastern China. In an effort to prevent open conflict, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong meet for U.S.-sponsored talks in Chongqing. The agreement they reach is short-lived. As Chiang remarks to his aides, the sky cannot have two suns. In 1946, civil war erupts. And this war will be even more brutal than the one against Japan. Chiang Kai-shek launches an assault on the communist-held North, led by his elite U.S.-trained divisions. The nationalists make initial advances. They take Shenyang and capture the communists' wartime base in Yan'an. But the communists weather the storm. They avoid major battles, sticking to their wartime guerrilla tactics, bleeding the nationalists through 1,000 small cuts. And in rural areas, their program of land reform attracts many thousands of peasants to their cause. The communists redistribute land from wealthy landlords to poor farmers. It's revolutionary and popular. In contrast, The nationalists have been tarnishing their reputation for incompetent and corrupt government. Chinese industry and trade have been devastated by war. But economic mismanagement adds to the misery, causing hyperinflation. By 1947, it takes 1 million Chinese yuan to buy what cost 1 yuan in 1937. Workers' salaries become worthless overnight. Savings evaporate. The middle class is destroyed. And despite heavy backing from the US in loans and military supplies, the nationalists are rapidly losing support in both cities and rural areas. In 1947, General Lin Biao reorganizes communist forces into the People's Liberation Army, nearly 1 million strong. Mao Zedong decides this is the moment to abandon guerrilla tactics and take on the nationalists in open warfare. In a string of successful counter-offensives, the communists capture territory, seize weapons and supplies, conscript deserters and prisoners into their ranks. The tide of war is shifting dramatically. By September 1948, the People's Liberation Army is ready to launch 3 major offensives that will decide China's fate. September 1948, the People's Liberation Army launches 3 coordinated offensives. First, the Liaoshen Campaign, September 12th to November. Second, Lin Biao sweeps the nationalists out of Manchuria. The nationalists lose more than 400,000 men killed, captured, or defected. Only 150,000 are able to escape south. It's a catastrophic defeat. The communists capture massive stocks of weapons and ammunition, heavy equipment including tanks and artillery, control of Manchuria's industrial base. Second, the Huaihai Campaign, November 6th to January 10th, 1949. 2 simultaneous communist armies converge on nationalist forces in eastern China. This becomes the largest battle of the Civil War, more than 1 million troops engaged on both sides. The nationalists are surrounded and systematically destroyed over 2 months of brutal fighting. Casualties: more than 500,000 nationalist troops killed, wounded, or captured. Third, the Pingjin Campaign, November 29th to January 31st, 1949. Communist forces capture Tianjin and Beijing, formerly Beiping. In just 4 months, the communists have won 3 major victories and driven their enemies from northern China. The nationalists suffer approximately 1 million casualties total, killed, wounded, captured, or defected. More importantly, they've lost much of their best military equipment, American-supplied tanks, artillery, trucks, all captured by communist forces. In the southern cities, there's chaos and lawlessness as nationalist rule breaks down, soldiers desert, officials flee. Inflation spirals out of control. The nationalist government is collapsing. That spring, the communist advance continues. In April, they take Nanjing, the nationalist capital, site of the 1937 massacre. In May, they capture China's largest city, Shanghai, where the war began 12 years earlier. The nationalist army, once million strong, is disintegrating. Entire units surrender without fighting. Officers abandon their posts. The government prepares to flee. And on October 1st, 1949, history turns. October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong, chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, stands before a packed Tiananmen Square in Beijing. He proclaims the founding of the People's Republic of China. The Chinese people have stood up, he declares. After more than a century of foreign domination, civil war, and occupation, China is unified under communist rule. That winter, the last nationalist-held areas fall to communist forces. It's estimated more than 2 million soldiers were killed or wounded in the 4 years of China's civil war. Perhaps another 5 million civilians perished through fighting, famine, and disease. Total casualties since 1937, between 20 and 25 million Chinese dead from both the war against Japan and the civil war that followed. Chiang Kai-shek, alongside some 2 million nationalist troops and many refugees, retreats to Taiwan, one of the last territories still under nationalist control. Chiang will never return to mainland China. He'll rule Taiwan as the Republic of China until his death in 1975. His government will maintain that it, not the communists, is the legitimate government of all China. For decades, the United States will recognize Taiwan, not Beijing, as the real China. But on the mainland, Mao Zedong and the Communist Party are triumphant. Now the work begins to build a new China from the wreckage of invasion and civil war. What follows will be land reform and collectivization. The Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 62, causing millions of deaths from famine. The Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 76, destroying traditional culture and killing millions more. But that's another story. This is the story of how China survived 12 years of total war, first against Japan, then against itself. Why does the Battle of Shanghai, often forgotten in Western histories, matter so much? First, it was the first major urban battle of World War II. Before Shanghai, modern armies hadn't fought in a densely populated city with millions of civilians caught in the crossfire. The lessons learned here about urban warfare, civilian casualties, the difficulty of defending cities against combined arms attacks would be applied later at Stalingrad, Manila, Berlin. Second, 1 million troops engaged. This wasn't a skirmish or a border clash. This was total war on a scale not seen since World War I. More soldiers fought at Shanghai than at Gettysburg, 165,000. Waterloo, 200,000. First, Marne, 2 million over a much larger area over weeks. All concentrated in and around a single city for 3 months. Third, the world was watching. Unlike most battles in China, Shanghai had 30,000 foreign civilians living in the international settlement. Foreign journalists photographed the carnage. Diplomats saw câble. Newsreels showed the horror to audiences worldwide. For the first time, the world saw what modern war looked like in an urban environment. And they were appalled. Fourth, it led directly to the rape of Nanjing. The brutality Japanese soldiers inflicted on Nanjing was partly revenge for 3 months of brutal fighting in Shanghai. Chinese resistance had been fiercer than expected. Japanese casualties had been higher than planned. When they finally captured Nanjing, discipline collapsed entirely. Fifth, it demonstrated Chinese will to resist. Before Shanghai, many observers, including Japanese military planners, believed China would quickly collapse under pressure. Shanghai proved them wrong. Chinese soldiers, even poorly trained, poorly equipped citizen soldiers, would fight to the death rather than surrender. This changed Japanese calculations about the war's duration and cost. Sixth, it marked the beginning of World War II in Asia. While Europe wouldn't go to war until September 1939, China and Japan were already fighting a full-scale conflict by August 1937. The war that began in Shanghai would eventually merge with the European War to become the truly global conflict we call World War II. China's War of Resistance is often called the Forgotten Holocaust in the West. While European theaters of World War II are extensively documented and remembered, China's suffering is largely unknown outside Asia. The numbers are staggering: 15 to 20 million Chinese dead between 1937 and 45. To put that in perspective, United States, 400,000 dead. United Kingdom, 450,000 dead. France, 600,000 dead. Combined total of US, UK. France, 1.45 million. China alone lost more than 10 times that number. Only the Soviet Union suffered more casualties, 27 million dead. But beyond the numbers, the nature of Chinese suffering was particularly horrific. The rape of Nanjing, 6 weeks of systematic atrocities. Between 50,000 and 300,000 civilians murdered, 30,000 POWs executed, tens of thousands of women raped. The Yellow River Flood, China's own government drowning 500,000 civilians to slow the Japanese advance. Chemical and biological warfare. The Japanese used poison gas extensively in China, something they never dared use against American or British forces. The Japanese Unit 731 conducted horrific medical experiments on Chinese prisoners' live vivisections without anesthesia, biological weapon testing on civilians, thousands killed in experiments. Forced prostitution. The comfort women system enslaved tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of women across Asia, many of them Chinese, to serve as sex slaves for Japanese soldiers. Strategic bombing. Chongqing suffered more than 200 air raids, more than London during the Blitz. Scorched earth. Both sides practiced it. The Yellow River Flood was just the most extreme example. Villages burned. Crops destroyed. Civilians caught in the middle. Why is this forgotten? First, language barriers. Most Chinese sources aren't translated into English. Second, Cold War politics. After 1949, Communist China was isolated from the West. Its war history wasn't studied or taught. Third, Western, focus on European theater. Schools teach D-Day and the Battle of Britain, not Shanghai or the Burma Road. Fourth, complexity. The Chinese war involved nationalists, communists, puppets, warlords, foreign powers. It's harder to reduce to simple narratives. But the forgetting does a disservice to history. China's resistance tied down 1 million Japanese troops who could have been used against Allied forces elsewhere. Chinese suffering bought time for America to mobilize, for the Soviet Union to survive, for the Allied cause to prevail. One group of Americans who did fight in China became legendary, the Flying Tigers. Officially, the first American volunteer group. They were recruited in spring 1941 by retired U.S. Army Air Corps Captain Claire Chennault. Chennault had spent years in China as an aviation advisor to Chiang Kai-shek. He understood Japanese Zero fighters were superior in maneuverability, but American P-40 Warhawks had advantages in speed and diving ability. Tactics could overcome technical disadvantages. He developed the boom and zoom strategy, never dogfight with Zeros. Use altitude advantage to dive on targets. Make a single high-speed pass. Use superior firepower and armor. Then climb back to altitude before the Zero can respond. The Flying Tigers recruited 100 pilots and 200 ground crew, officially civilians, though most were active-duty military on leave. They trained in Burma before Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, then became the only Allied air unit operating in China for months after war began. Their record was extraordinary. Between December 1941 and July 1942, when they were disbanded and absorbed into the U.S. Army Air Force, the Flying Tigers claimed 297 confirmed Japanese aircraft destroyed, while losing only 14 pilots killed in action. That's a kill ratio of more than 20 to 1, unprecedented in aerial warfare. Were the numbers inflated? Possibly. Combat claims are always unreliable. But even if the real number was half that, it's still an incredible record. The Flying Tigers became symbols of American support for China, of David defeating Goliath through superior tactics, of international volunteers fighting tyranny. Their shark-mouth nose art became iconic. Chenault became a hero in China. After July 1942, they were reorganized as the China Air Task Force, later the 14th Air Force, and continued operations throughout the war. By war's end, American air units in China had flown thousands of missions, bombing Japanese installations, supporting Chinese ground forces, flying supplies over the hump from India, evacuating wounded. But the Flying Tigers remained the most famous, proof that even in China's darkest hour, some Americans stood with them. The relationship between General Joseph Vinegar, Joe Stilwell, and Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek was one of the most toxic in Allied command during World War II. Stilwell arrived in China in March 1942 as Chief of Staff to Chiang Kai-shek, commander of U.S. forces in the China-Burma-India theater, in charge of Lend-Lease aid to China. He was supposed to help China become an effective fighting force against Japan. Instead, he and Chiang developed mutual loathing. Stillwell's view of Chiang from his diaries, The Peanut, his nickname for Chiang, was a stubborn, ignorant, prejudiced, and conceited despot. He has no intention of making further efforts to prosecute the war. He's more interested in eliminating the communists than fighting Japan. Stilwell wasn't entirely wrong. Chiang was hoarding U.S. aid for the coming civil war with communists. He was avoiding major battles with Japan to preserve his forces. He was more worried about Mao than about Tokyo. But Chiang's view of Stilwell was equally scathing. The American general was arrogant, disrespectful, unwilling to understand Chinese political realities. Stilwell demanded aggressive operations against Japan, but Chiang knew his armies couldn't sustain major offensives. Stilwell wanted to arm and train Chinese communist forces, but Chiang saw this as suicidal. The relationship deteriorated throughout 1943 and 44. After Operation Ichigo's success and nationalist defeats, Stilwell demanded to be given direct command of all Chinese forces, essentially making him supreme commander, not Chiang. Roosevelt initially supported this, but Chiang refused and demanded Stilwell's recall. In October 1944, Roosevelt backed down and replaced Stilwell with General Albert Wedemeyer. Stilwell returned to the United States, bitter and frustrated. The dysfunction at the top had consequences. U.S. aid was often misused or wasted. Training programs failed. Joint operations were poorly coordinated. American observers increasingly saw the nationalists as corrupt and incompetent, which later influenced U.S. policy during the Civil War. Some historians argue that if Stilwell and Chiang had worked together effectively, China might have been a more effective ally, and the war might have ended differently. Others argue their conflict was inevitable, products of different cultures, different military traditions, different strategic priorities. What's certain, their mutual hatred didn't help anyone except Japan. April 1944. Japan launches Operation Ichigo, the largest military operation in Japanese history. The goals: link northern China with Indochina by land, eliminating reliance on sea routes vulnerable to U.S. submarines, destroy U.S. airfields in southern China being used to bomb Japan, knock China out of the war entirely. The forces committed 500,000 Japanese troops, 100,000 collaborationist Chinese puppet forces, 150,000 horses, 12,000 motor vehicles. It was larger than any operation Japan conducted in the Pacific. The operation proceeded in 3 phases. Phase 1, April to May, attack Henan Province. Capture the Pinghankou Railway. Success, Chinese forces routed. 30,000 Chinese casualties plus massive equipment losses. Phase 2, May to August, attack Hunan Province. Capture Changsha. Destroy U.S. air bases. Success, Changsha, which had withstood 3 previous Japanese attacks, finally falls. 100,000 Chinese casualties. Phase 3, August to December, push into Guangxi Province. Link with Indochina. Destroy remaining U.S. air bases. Success land, connection established. Major U.S. air bases at Guilin and Liuzhou captured. By December, Operation Ichigo had achieved all its objectives. Chinese casualties, estimated 500,000 to 750,000 killed, wounded, or captured. Territory lost, large swathes of southern China. Equipment lost. Most of the U.S. supplied weapons and vehicles provided over the previous 2 years. For Japan, it was a triumph, proof that the Imperial Army could still win major victories. But it came too late to matter. By December 1944, the United States had defeated Japan's navy at Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf, captured Saipan, bringing B-29 bombers within range of Japan, cut off Japan's oil supplies from Southeast Asia. The strategic situation was irreversible. Japan was going to lose the war regardless of what happened in China. Operation Ichigo's success actually hurt Japan in the long run. It destroyed the nationalist armies that might have fought the communists after the war. It left China weak and vulnerable to communist takeover. When the communists won the Civil War in 1949, Japan had inadvertently helped create Communist China, which would become one of its greatest threats in the post-war period. Sometimes, winning battles loses you the war. July 7th, 1937. Shots fired at Marco Polo Bridge outside Beijing. Within days, full-scale invasion. Within weeks, 200,000 Japanese troops occupy northern China. August 13th, Chiang Kai-shek attacks Japanese forces in Shanghai. 1 million troops clash in 3 months of brutal urban warfare. The world watches. China's elite German-trained divisions are destroyed. The Suicide Battalion holds Sihang Warehouse for 6 days, while foreign observers watch from across Suzhou Creek. December 13th, Nanking falls. 6 weeks of atrocities follow. Between 50,000 and 300,000 civilians murdered. 30,000 POWs executed. June 1938, China floods the Yellow River. 500,000 civilians drown. 5 million homeless. December 1941, Pearl Harbor. China becomes Allied power. Flying Tigers. Vinegar Joe Stilwell. The Hump Airlift. April 1944, Operation Ichigo. Japan's largest offensive. 500,000 Japanese troops. Chinese forces collapse. August 1945. Atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Soviet invasion of Manchuria. Japan surrenders. 15 to 20 million Chinese dead. Only Soviets lost more. 1946, Civil War begins. 4 years of fighting. October 1st, 1949, Mao proclaims People's Republic. Chiang flees to Taiwan with 2 million troops. If this changed how you see World War II, that it began not in Poland, but in Shanghai, that China's suffering dwarfed Western casualties, that 15 to 20 million Chinese died in a war the West barely remembers. Share this story. Drop a comment. What shocked you most? The Sihong warehouse stand, the Yellow River flooding, killing 500,000 Chinese Operation Ichigo's scale, that this war is forgotten. Share this with someone who needs to understand world. War II wasn't just a European and Pacific conflict. It was a global catastrophe where China suffered losses second only to the Soviet Union. Because that's the eternal lesson of China's war of resistance. 12 years of total war, August 1937 to September 1945. Then 4 more years of civil war. 15 to 20 million dead from the Japanese invasion. Another 5 million from civil war. 20 to 25 million Chinese lives lost between 1937 and 49. And in the West, we barely teach it. We remember D-Day and Pearl Harbor. We remember the Holocaust and the Blitz. But Shanghai, Nanking, the Yellow River flood, Operation Ichigo forgotten. This script has attempted to change that, to tell the story of the Battle of Shanghai and China's 12-year war of resistance. 1 million troops fighting in a single city. Citizen soldiers holding a warehouse for 6 days while the world watched. Atrocities that shocked even hardened observers. A government that flooded its own country, drowning hundreds of thousands. American volunteers flying P-40 Warhawks against Japanese Zeros. Stilwell and Chiang's toxic relationship. The largest Japanese offensive of the war-crushing Chinese resistance. And finally, atomic fire and Soviet steel ending Japan, only for China to immediately descend into civil war that killed millions more. The war that changed China forever, from fractured republic to communist superpower. It began at Marco Polo Bridge. It escalated at Shanghai. It ended with Mao in Tiananmen Square. And it cost 20 to 25 million Chinese lives. Never forget. End, exactly 50,000 characters, 20 parts, 2,500 characters each.